Welcome. Welcome to the Sunday school class with the friendship class. We're glad you're with us. Now, today is the first Sunday of December, but it is the second Sunday of Advent. This is the second Sunday in a unit of study on the four mothers of Jesus. You heard that? Now, it's a bit unusual, to say the least. In Advent this year and this unit, we are looking at women who appear in the ancestry of Jesus. Now, Matthew records the ancestry of Jesus through Mary. Luke records the ancestry of Jesus through Joseph. It's a bit of a problem to me, but anyway, that's not today's lesson. That's another conversation. But there is the fact that we're looking at 5 women this month: Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and then Mary. And that's quite a lineup of women that we know in the Bible. It is a bit odd and strange, but it is what it is, and we will follow our assignment. Now, as a little preview or as an aside here, you recall the last lesson that I taught was on rebuilding the temple, rebuild, restore, Haggai. And you recall that I said when I introduced that lesson, you know, all of us teachers kind of have our little moments of, this isn't, why did I get this one? You know, that kind of thing. That was a lesson that I thoroughly enjoyed because it was about rebuilding and restoring. And I said, I just felt comfortable with that lesson, and I felt like that it was meant for me. Well, I spoke too soon, didn't I? Because today I get the one about Rahab, the prostitute. And I get this one. Now, when we came in last Sunday, Bert was teaching, and I said, Bert, he was on Tamar. I said, Bert, haven't you taught this lesson before? He said, yeah, I did. Taught it last summer. Okay, I have taught this lesson on Rahab before, and I'm trying to think, did I teach it in here? Or was it someplace? You know, see, I taught it where. I think maybe I taught it in here because I think that was the Sunday that I used the spiritual Joshua at the Battle of Jericho. Did that. Okay, so it's been several years ago. I do remember that. All right, here we are. We're in a lesson about Rahab, the prostitute. That's how people identify her. Now, this is a story of intrigue, espionage, suspense. It's a spy thriller. I couldn't have made this one up, and you couldn't have either. Most of the story is contained in Joshua 2 and finally ends in chapter 6 in the book of Joshua. And rather than reading this to you, as I frequently do, I'm going to paraphrase this in story form because I think it's easier to follow and I don't get bogged down. All right, now before we get into this lesson, let's get a little history lesson and put people in their proper perspective. And also, you know, the old history teacher never uses a chance to waste a map, so I point to the map. Now, for the time in history that this took place, the Israelites have escaped from Egypt. They were bonded in slavery. Moses was the leader, as you recall, and you recall the coming through the Red Sea, and they were into Sinai. Now, Joshua is the successor to Moses. And at the time of our story, these people are camping on the east side of the Jordan River, and they need to capture the city of Jericho in order to get into the promised land. All right, I'm stepping away here. Egypt, Sinai, Canaan up here, and Jericho right here. Now, hold on. And you people are there see. All right. Now, I don't know if you people at home can see or the people over here. Egypt, Sinai, and Canaan way up there, Jericho right above the Dead Sea near the Jordan River. All right, that's the time and the place that our story takes to today. So they need to take the city of Jericho by force in order to claim this land. And Joshua is the leader. He sends 2 spies into Jericho to figure, the lay of the land, what's going on, and what they need to know and to do. Incidentally, if you remember, Joshua has already been a spy. He was one of the 12 spies that Moses sent out earlier. So he's got these 2 spies that he sends into Jericho. All right, now, scene 1 in our story. The 2 men go in as spies. And when the story opens, they're in Jericho, and we find that they are in a house of prostitution. Questions. How did they get there? What's this all about? Did they go seeking out this place of prostitution when they immediately got to the city? Did they think maybe that this place was a good cover for their espionage? Did they just stumble into it, or did they go looking for it? Maybe the hand of providence was guiding them to someone who would protect them. We don't know the answers to any of these questions, but this is where these men are in scene 1. All right, and the second thing that we need to consider before we get into the story is we know that Rahab is a prostitute. Now, I don't know a whole lot about prostitution, and I don't imagine that many of you do either. Well, my impression is it's immoral, it's illegal. The events take place in a house or a building, and we usually refer to this place as the house of ill repute. It's in a red light district, and there are usually several or many women, I don't know how many, and the head woman that sort of manages and oversees all this is a madam. Now, does that go with what y'all know? Okay. And past that, I don't know a whole lot. But that's what we see in the movies, isn't it? Or like the Wild West, the Gunsmoke, all those things. So that's just the impressions that we have so far. Now, I do feel there's a lot more to know about the culture of prostitution and the subcultures of prostitution all over the world. And in the reading that I did for this lesson, I learned that there is a lot more to know about the culture, especially in biblical times and especially in the pre-industrial world. All right, we're told the 2 spies go to Rahab's house. Now, this does not fit our image of a traditional, what do we want to call it, house of ill repute. This is where she lived. This was her father's house. She lived there with her parents, and her brothers, and her sisters, and apparently there was a large extended family. Apparently, as the story goes, she provides for the rest of the family. In other words, she's the one that makes the money. Poverty is a great source of prostitution the world over. Not in the biblical times, but today. Now, let me intersect another little aside here, little story that I want to tell you that will help us all be more knowledgeable about what's going on in the rest of the world. Rolf and Sally White are new members of our church in our class, and he's here this morning. Rolf is a medical doctor, and gynecology is his field of expertise. In getting to know him, I find out he knows a lot that we don't know. You know that? Because he's a medical doctor. All right. And after joining our church, I mentioned to him about David Elliott. Now, do you all know who David Elliott is? All right. David, too, is a medical doctor. He sings in our choir. And you may have heard his name recently because he's written some letters to the editor on abortion and other such issues. I'm pulling all this together in a few minutes. I first got to know David when he gave a Wednesday night program. It was several years before COVID. And he works for Doctors Without Borders. It was a fascinating presentation. I mean, the things we learned, his experiences and the things we learned were just amazing. Now, David is a doctor. He was a doctor in the military. He's a West Point grad, and he was a doctor in the military. He's retired from that, and now he's in Doctors Without Borders. So after Sally and Rolf joined our church, and this article appeared in the newspaper, we talked about him, and Rolf wanted me to point him out in the choir procession. And which one is he? I said, listen, if you're interested in knowing this man, I can make this happen. Let's just invite him to our place and we'll have dinner and we'll get to know one another. Well, it happened and it was wonderful. Now, the wonder of it all was you got these two doctors that know a lot, that traveled all over the world. Bill and I just sort of sat there and learned a lot. I mean, things we never even thought of. All right. And in the course of the conversation, and Rolf, you can get me on this because he was there. David Elliott began to talking about some of these third world countries in Africa and the rights of women or lack of rights of women and how they're dealt with and how things happen. And he was speaking of what was it, Kenya? I forgot the country. Cattle is the currency in that country. If you have a large family of children, you got boys and you got girls, what you do is when your daughter is ready to get married, you sell her to another family and they give you so many head of cattle for that daughter. Really. And Rolf made the point of the conversation. He says, you know what just blows his mind? If you have a large family of children and you have a daughter and she is raped, then the family kills that daughter, because she's no longer marketable to the family. I mean, is that just really? And I made the statement in the conversation. I said, you know, this makes me think that my father was right years ago. He said, one half the world doesn't know how the other half lives. And quickly, David turned around. He said, oh, it's a much higher percentage than that. He said, I'd say we don't know how 3/4 of the world lives. Really? So you get my point in conversation. The doctors who know all of this and know the cultures of the other countries can really enlighten us if we would just ask enough questions. Because I think, and I say this all the time at studying the Bible, we are white people. We live in a democracy. We are in a church that is free in its thinking and its beliefs. Most of us in this room were educated in some of the best colleges and universities in our country. And here we are. We do not fully grasp and understand what some people in the rest of the world have to do to survive. Prostitution in many places in the world is a means of survival. And it is not just a choice that we kind of wink and grin at. It's terrible to think that people are in these situations, but they are. And poverty is the driving force underneath so much of this. Now, does this make sense, Ron? Have I been true to our conversation? Okay. You want to speak up, you're free to say something. All right. But this for us was kind of a wake-up call. And I think it's imperative to talk about this in today's lesson. All right, now back to our story. These two spies found themselves in Rahab's house. Now, number one, they're not real good spies because quickly they are found out. The king of the city of Jericho, whoever he is, he quickly knows who they are, where they are, and what they're about. So he immediately puts out word to, let's get rid of these men. Let's find out about them. Now, this puts Rahab in a very awkward position Oh, by the way, another thing that came to my mind after the lesson last week on Tamar, in our situation today, we can look at these women and we can think, gee whiz, this sure kind of conniving and kind of manipulative. They learned to do it to survive. They were in a culture of dominant men who controlled everything. And whatever they could do to survive for themselves and their families, they did it. So I think this is a driving force behind Rahab and Tamar both. So Rahab is in an awkward position. She's supposed to turn them in to the king as he ordered. That's what she should have done. But she chose to do something differently. She made a calculated gamble. She decided to side with these foreign invaders over her own people. She had a sense that their God, the God of the Israelites, would somehow grant them victory. Now, how she knew this, whether she had heard about the Red Sea, we don't know what she had learned before this, but she had a sense that this might be worth the chance to take, and so she took it. And she decided that she would hide the spies on the roof of her house underneath stalks of flax. Somebody said, well, maybe it was close to Passover time. This was a convenient way for this to happen. But she had a place that she could hide them, and she did. And so she had spun a very convincing tale to the authorities in her city. She said, yes, I have seen them and they have been here, but they have left. And so she sent the king's army on a hot chase toward the Jordan River, thinking that they had escaped. But all the while, the spies were hiding on her roof. And after the soldiers left the city and were long gone, the gates were closed, she helped the spies to escape. But she had a plan. She said, okay, I've helped you, now you help me. There again, smart. She got them to agree that when the Israelites came in to capture the city of Jericho, that they would leave her family and pardon them and not make them subject to the army. The spies said, okay, we'll do that. Now, would you leave the crimson cord, whatever that is, in the window, so that once we are hit, that was what they had used, I think, to climb up to the roof. But they said, would you leave this in the window so that we will have a sign, and then we will not disturb your household and the people that are here. She agreed to this. All right. They hid in the hill country for several days and then crossed over the Jordan River and returned to Joshua, telling him what they had seen. They said to Joshua, the people of Jericho are anxious and they are very frightened. And they said in verse 24 in our lesson today, all the inhabitants of the land melted fear before us. Now, I wonder, did they really know that? Or they just kind of telling that to him? I don't know. But anyway, that was the story. And that was the deal that was made between Rahab and the two spies. In exchange for being saved and held away from the army, that they would save her family. Now, that's the story in today's lesson. All right, now to finish the story as it unfolds, it goes on to chapter 6 in Joshua. And this is the story that we know from our Sunday school lessons previously about Joshua at the Battle of Jericho. The Israelites followed God's instruction, and they marched around the city for 6 days with the Ark of the Covenant. we can picture that. Then on the seventh day, they marched 7 times. And then after this, they blew the ram's horns and shouted that the city would fall flat. And Joshua did instruct the army to leave Rahab's house alone, just as they'd been told. Now, so that's the story. Those were his orders. Joshua kept his word. And that's the end of the story. Jericho fell, and all went on. Now, to go further with the story, Rahab marries a man named Salmon. They have a son named Boaz. Boaz marries Ruth, and they have a son named Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse and the grandfather of David. So do you see the lineage, how it goes on? Now, my question for you, and I really would love us to talk about this, but it's hard to do when we have the technology. Here's our question. How could a prostitute who betrayed her people, told blatant lies, end up in the lineage of the Messiah and be honored as a model of faith and good works? I just look at everybody's take on that. Smart. What? She was smart. She was smart. Did y'all hear that? Yeah, that's right. Okay. That's Betty Rose's take. Now, anybody else want to have a comment? I'll repeat it. Anybody else want to have a comment? Oh, I bet thoughts are running through your mind a mile an hour.
God fits in this somehow.
God what?
Fits into this.
God fits in somehow. Yes. Good statement.
Some good comes out of everything.
Some good comes out of everything. Okay, we might challenge that, but that's okay. That's all right. Even a very bad situation can have something there. That's your point. Yes. Anyone else?
She was willing to take a risk.
She took a risk, a bold risk. Anyone else?
It's in the darkness that light is dawn.
Say that again.
It's from the darkness that light dawns.
Absolutely. It is from the darkness that light dawns. Good point. All right, these are very good points. I'm sure if we had better facilities, we could say more. Her actions are celebrated and referred to twice in the New Testament. Hebrews 11:31. By faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had received spies in peace. And in James chapter 2 suggests that Rahab's actions in welcoming the spies led directly to her justification. And James is the writer that uses the phrase, faith without works is dead. She was willing to take a risk and do some things. When we look at all of so many characters in the Old Testament, think of them. Think of the ones you know. Noah. All the things we talk about Noah. He was discovered in a drunken stupor by his sons. Jacob. He was a cheater and a swindler. Joseph was an insufferable braggart. Moses, in a fit of anger, killed an Egyptian, a murderer. Rahab was a prostitute, as we know. David, who has his affair with Bathsheba. So there's hardly anyone on the list of people whose names we celebrate in the Old Testament that has a perfect life or sinless life. And the same thing is true in the New Testament. Look at Peter. Look at Peter. Denying Jesus, hot-headed, doing this, and the other. Jesus says to him, upon this rock will I build my church. Now, there is a famous quote that I have heard preachers use, and I've heard some preachers use it in reference to others, that was common among older, more fundamentalist, Bible-thumping preachers. They used to preach a sermon on some of this and say, you know, God can hit a straight lick with a crooked stick. And that's kind of a, I don't know, funny old saying, but don't you think it has some truth in it? Yeah. And I think for you and for me today, God can use all of us in his kingdom's work, regardless of our faults, regardless of our past, regardless of what sinful things we may or may not have done. In some way, God can use them in his work. And the Bible is a perfect example of recording this for us. None of these people were sinless. If sinlessness is a prerequisite for getting things done, for advancing God's kingdom, it certainly doesn't show up in the Bible. We can all be used. I have a funny little story that I love to tell. I think I've shared it with you before about a friend of ours in seminary. And he grew up in Laurel, Mississippi. And in one of our churches, I had a dear friend that was from Laurel. And I said to her, did you know, forgot the guy's name now. Oh, yes, I knew him. Good gracious. She said, I was a nurse in the delivery room the night he was born. I taught him in Sunday school. I know all about it. And she said, he was the most mischievous little old boy I have ever seen in my life. She said, when it wasn't bad, but he was just into things. And when he came in, you just wanted to spank him on general principles just to calm him down. He was just a nightmare on every teacher's dream. And she said, when I heard that he had gone into the ministry, she said, I thought to myself, you know, God can use about most anything. True. God can and does. And we should not look at ourselves and our inadequacies, our lack of talent, or anything as an excuse. God can use us in any way in his kingdom's work. And the fact that Jesus has something like this in his lineage, truth be known, we might have some horse thieves or some bad people in our lineage. You studied your ancestry, you probably found out. But this is today's lesson, that God can use all of us in his kingdom's work in some way if we are simply open to what he has for us.